July 30th, 1943. 25,000 feet above Germany. The air so cold it could freeze a man's breath inside his lungs. Staff Sergeant James Mitchell sat in the tail of a B-17 bomber called Lucky Strike, watching death come toward him at 400 miles per hour. A German Messerschmitt, black crosses on yellow nose, diving straight at his position. 8 seconds. That's all the time Jim had. 8 seconds to make a decision that would either save his life or end it. His hands gripped the twin .50 caliber machine guns. His finger rested on the trigger. The manual said to wait. The United States Army Air Force Gunnery Manual, tested and proven, written by men with more experience than Jim would ever have. The manual said hold your fire until 300 yards. Jim watched the Messerschmitt dive closer. 700 yards, 650, 600. The manual said wait, but Jim's best friend had followed the manual. Bobby Martinez, 22 years old, from Arizona, dead because he did exactly what the manual told him to do. Jim squeezed both triggers at 800 yards. The twin Browning machine guns roared to life. Tracer rounds streaked across the sky, with bright lines of fire cutting through the frozen air. Too low at first. Jim adjusted. The tracers climbed. At 600 yards, they began connecting with the diving fighter. Bright flashes sparked along the engine cowling. The German pilot saw the fire coming. He had no choice. He broke hard right, pulling out of his deep black smoke trailing from his aircraft. He never got close enough to fire his cannons. Jim Mitchell had just saved his crew by breaking the rules. But 6 months earlier, he was just a kid from Montana who had never been further than Billings. Now he was in the loneliest job in the war, the tail gunner position. 4 feet wide, 5 feet long, separated from the rest of his crew by 40 feet of aluminum fuselage. No one to talk to. No one to help if something went wrong. Just a man, 2 guns, and whatever the German Luftwaffe sent his way. The statistics were brutal. In the summer of 1943, the average B-17 crew survived 11 missions before being shot down, killed, or captured. Tail gunners died faster than anyone except ball turret gunners. Jim was on mission number 13. This is the story of how a 24-year-old from Montana proved the entire United States Army wrong, how he survived when tail gunners were dying every mission, how he changed the way America fought the air war, and how thousands of men came home to their families because Jim Mitchell refused to accept that good men had to die following bad rules. But first we need to go back to Montana, back to before the war, back to when Jim was just a kid learning to hunt with his father. The hunter's son, Red Lodge, Montana, population 800. A town so small you could walk from one end to the other in 15 minutes. Surrounded by mountains, bordered by forest. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and a man's word was his bond. Jim Mitchell grew up there. His father, Thomas, was a forest ranger and a hunter. His mother, Ellen, taught at the local schoolhouse. They had 2 sons. Jim was the older one. His brother David was 5 years younger. Every autumn, Thomas would take Jim hunting, elk mostly, sometimes deer. They would hike into the mountains before dawn, frost crunching under their boots, their breath making clouds in the cold air. Thomas taught Jim to shoot when he was 8 years old, started him on a .22 rifle, tin cans on fence posts, then moving targets, rabbits, squirrels. But the most important lesson came when Jim was 12. They were tracking an elk, a big one. Thomas spotted it first, 400 yards away, feeding in a meadow. Jim raised his rifle, sighted down the barrel. His finger moved to the trigger. Thomas put his hand on the rifle barrel, lowered it gently. "Don't shoot yet," Thomas said quietly. "But Pa, it's right there. You're thinking about where it is. You need to think about where it will be." Jim didn't understand. Thomas explained, "You shoot now, elk hears the shot, starts running before the bullet gets there. You miss, elk escapes. We go home empty-handed. But if you shoot early, make some noise, spook him, just a little, he moves, changes direction, comes closer, or moves into better position. Then you have a better shot." Jim frowned. But what if he runs away completely? Then he was going to run anyway. Better to know that now than after you've wasted your shot. Thomas taught Jim to shoot where the target would be, not where it was. To think ahead, to anticipate, to control the situation before taking the shot. "Patience is good," Thomas said, "but smart action is better than patient inaction." Jim remembered that lesson. He would remember it when it mattered most, when the stakes were higher than one elk, when men's lives depended on whether he shot early or waited. But that was years away. First came December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Jim was 23, working at a lumber mill. David was 18, still in high school. They heard about Pearl Harbor on the radio. Sunday afternoon, the family was in the living room. Ellen was knitting. Thomas was reading the newspaper. Jim and David were playing checkers. The broadcast interrupted regular programming. Japanese planes had attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Hundreds dead, ships sinking. America was at war. Thomas put down his newspaper, looked at his sons. "Boys," he said quietly, "everything just changed." Within a month, Jim had enlisted. Army Air Corps. He wanted to fly, wanted to drop bombs on the enemy, wanted to end the war as quickly as possible. David wanted to enlist too, but Ellen put her foot down. "One son in the war is enough," she said. "David, you finish school first," David argued. But Ellen was firm. Jim backed her up. "Ma's right," Jim said. "Finish school. War will probably be over by then anyway." He was wrong. The war was just beginning, and it would take much longer than anyone expected. The day Jim left for training, Ellen gave him something. A small photograph, 3 inches by 4 inches, black and white, their whole family, taken the previous Christmas. Thomas standing tall and proud, Ellen smiling gently, Jim and David on either side, both grinning. "Keep this close, James," Ellen said. She only called him James when she was serious. "Remember who you're fighting for. Remember who's waiting for you to come home." Jim put the photograph in his shirt pocket. He would carry it through training, through the flight to England, through every mission, through fire and fear and blood. That photograph would save his life. But that comes later. The Deadly Doctrine Gunnery School, Las Vegas, Nevada, January through March 1943. The desert was hot even in winter, nothing like Montana. Jim sweated through his uniform every day. The instructors were tough. Former combat veterans, most of them, men who had already done their tour and survived. Captain Raymond Burke was Jim's primary instructor, 32 years old, a pilot on his first tour, 25 missions over Germany, shot down once, spent 2 weeks evading capture before making it back to Allied lines. Burke knew his business, and he taught the Army way, the doctrine, the manual, the rules that kept men alive, or so he thought. Jim learned to operate the twin 50 caliber Browning machine guns, how to load them, how to clear jams, how to adjust for wind and distance in the movement of enemy aircraft, how to lead a target, how to conserve ammunition. Especially that last part, conserve ammunition. Burke drilled it into every student. "Gentlemen, listen carefully. You will carry 800 rounds per mission." That sounds like a lot. It is not. A mission deep into Germany can last 6 hours. You may face 15, 20, even 30 separate fighter attacks. If you waste ammunition on long-range shots, you will run dry before you reach home. And a tail gunner without ammunition is a dead man waiting to happen. He cannot defend his aircraft. His crew dies. He dies, and all because he could not control his trigger finger. Burke paced in front of the class. 30 young men all training to be tail gunners, all volunteers, all knowing the statistics, knowing that most of them would not survive their first tour. "The doctrine is simple," Burke continued. "Hold fire until 300 yards. Not 400, not 500, 300. At that range, your accuracy is highest. Your ammunition expenditure is lowest. You make every bullet count." Burke pointed at a diagram on the blackboard. A B-17 bomber, a German fighter approaching from the 6 o'clock position directly behind. Circles marked the ranges. 600 yards, 400 yards, 300 yards. At 600 yards, the enemy aircraft is a small target. Your probability of hitting is low. At 300 yards, the target is much larger. Probability of hitting is much higher. This is mathematics, gentlemen, not guesswork. The doctrine is built on experience and analysis. Jim raised his hand. Burke nodded at him. "Mitchell." "Sir, what if we fired earlier? At 600 yards, wouldn't that disrupt the enemy's attack? Make them break off before they could establish a firing solution?" Burke's expression hardened. Airman Mitchell, that is precisely the kind of thinking that gets crews killed. You would waste ammunition on low-probability shots. The enemy would simply continue his approach while you expended your rounds. Then when he reached optimal firing range, you would have nothing left to shoot back with. The doctrine exists for good reasons. Follow it. Your life depends on it. Jim didn't argue, but he thought about his father's lesson, about shooting early to make the elk change direction, about smart action versus patient inaction. The doctrine said wait, but Jim wondered if waiting was really smart. Other students accepted Burke's teaching without question. This was the Army. You followed orders. You followed doctrine. Men smarter than you, with more experience than you, had written these rules. Who were you to question them? But Jim couldn't stop thinking about it. Something felt wrong. The doctrine assumed the enemy would cooperate, would fly straight at you, giving you time to aim and fire at 300 yards. But what if the enemy didn't cooperate? What if they shot first? What if they disrupted your aim? What if 300 yards was already too late? Jim kept these thoughts to himself. He graduated gunnery school with the highest marks in his class. Burke called him into his office on the last day. "Mitchell, you have excellent scores. Best reflexes I've seen in months. You could be an outstanding tail gunner." "Thank you, sir." Burke leaned forward. "But you asked too many questions. In combat, doubt kills faster than bullets. Trust the system, trust the doctrine, trust your training. Do not try to reinvent tactics in the middle of a firefight. Men who think too much end up dead. Understand?" "Yes, sir." Burke studied him. "I hope so. You ship out to England next week. You'll join the 379th Bombardment Group. Good men, good crews. Follow their example. Follow the doctrine. Come home alive." Jim nodded. He wanted to come home alive, but he also wanted to do it the right way. And something deep inside told him that the doctrine might not be the right way. He just didn't know it yet. Didn't know that following the doctrine would cost his best friend's life. Didn't know that breaking the doctrine would save thousands. That knowledge would come soon enough, written in blood and fire over the skies of Germany. May 1943, RAF Kimbolton, England. Jim arrived on a transport plane with 20 other replacement crew members. The base was busy. B-17's taking off and landing constantly. Ground crews working on engines, patching bullet holes, replacing shattered plexiglass. The smell of aviation fuel and oil hung in the air. The 379th Bombardment Group had already been flying missions for 2 months. They had already lost aircraft. Already buried men. Jim was assigned to a crew, B-17F, serial number 4230947. The crew had named her Lucky Strike. Their previous tail gunner had completed his tour and rotated home. Jim was his replacement. The crew was good, professional, experienced. Major Bob Hayes was the pilot, 28 years old, flew 12 missions already, calm under fire, the kind of man who inspired confidence just by his presence. Lieutenant Samuel Chen was the co-pilot, 23, Chinese-American, brilliant at navigation, steady hands, never panicked. Elmer Greenberg was the navigator, 25, from New York, talked too much when he was nervous, which was often, but smart, could find his way home through clouds and flock and chaos. Tony Russo was the bombardier, 26, Brooklyn accent so thick you could cut it with a knife. Took his job seriously, wanted every bomb to count. 6 other men rounded out the crew. Waist gunners, radio operator, ball turret gunner, engineer, all good men, all professionals. They accepted Jim quickly. No hazing, no testing. In bomber crews, you lived or died together. Petty conflicts were luxuries they could not afford. The first thing Jim did was inspect his position, the tail gunner compartment. He crawled back through the narrow tunnel that ran along the bottom of the fuselage, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. The tail position was cramped, 4 feet wide, 5 feet long, 250 caliber machine guns mounted on a swivel, a bicycle seat bolted to the floor. That was all. No armor plating, no protection, just thin aluminum skin and a plexiglass bubble. Jim sat on the bicycle seat, tested the guns, checked the ammunition feeds, studied the field of view. He could see directly behind the aircraft, a 180-degree arc. Everything approaching from the rear was his responsibility. He also noticed something else. He was alone back here. completely alone, separated from the rest of the crew by 40 feet of fuselage. If something went wrong, if he was wounded, if the guns jammed, no one could help him. He would have to handle it himself. The loneliest job in the war. That's what the other tail gunners called it. Jim understood why. His first mission came on June 8th, target Wilhelmshaven, a port city in northern Germany. Submarine pens. The 8th Air Force wanted them destroyed. Pre-mission briefing at 0400 hours. Still dark outside. The briefing room was crowded. Pilots, navigators, bombardiers, all studying maps and weather reports in expected enemy opposition. Intelligence officer gave the briefing. Gentlemen, expect heavy flak over the target. Expect fighter opposition all the way in and all the way out. The Luftwaffe has positioned several fighter groups along your route. They know we're coming. They're ready. Numbers scrolled across the board. Altitude, speed, formation positions, bomb loads, expected time over target. Then the survival statistics. Current loss rate is 8% per mission. That means approximately 16 aircraft will not return today. Jim did the math. 190 B-17's flying this mission. 16 would not come back. 160 men, some killed instantly, some dying in burning aircraft falling through the sky, some captured, spending years in prison camps. 8%. And this was just one mission. Crews flew 25 missions per tour. The odds were not good. After the briefing, Jim walked to Lucky Strike with the rest of his crew. Dawn was breaking, the sky turning gray, then pink, then orange. Beautiful morning. Hard to believe they were about to fly into hell. Jim performed his pre-flight checks. Loaded ammunition, 800 rounds per gun, 1,600 total. The belts were long, heavy, draped through feed mechanisms that could jam if you weren't careful. He tested the guns, short bursts. The barrels recoiled shell casings, ejecting the familiar smell of burned powder. Everything worked. Hayes's voice crackled over the intercom. All stations check in. One by one, the crew reported ready. Tail gunner ready, Jim said. Roger. Everyone hang on. Here we go. The engine started. 4 Wright Cyclone radials, 1,800 horsepower each. The sound was incredible. A roar that shook the ground, rattled windows, made conversation impossible. Lucky Strike taxied to the runway, joined the long line of bombers waiting for takeoff. One by one, they rolled down the runway engines, straining, heavily loaded with fuel and bombs, barely clearing the trees at the end of the field. Lucky Strike's turn came. Hayes pushed the throttles forward. The engine screamed. The bomber accelerated, shaking, rattling, every rivet and bolt protesting. The tail lifted. Then the wheels. They were airborne. Jim watched England fall away beneath them. Green fields, stone walls, villages, everything peaceful and quiet below. While they climbed toward war, the formation assembled over the English Channel, 190 bombers flying in tight combat boxes, mutual protection, each aircraft covering the others with overlapping fields of fire. They crossed into occupied Europe at 14,000 feet, still climbing. The oxygen mask came on. The temperature dropped. At 20,000 feet, it was 20 below zero. At 25,000, it was 60 below. Jim wore an electrically heated flight suit. Without it, he would freeze to death in minutes. Even with it, the cold seeped in. His fingers went numb inside his gloves. His breath fogged inside his oxygen mask. The English Channel disappeared behind them. France below now, enemy territory. At any moment, German fighters could appear. Jim scanned the sky. Empty, clear, blue, peaceful. But the peace would not last. The fighters came at 10:30 hours. Small dots on the horizon, growing larger, closing fast. Bandits, 12 o'clock high, someone called over the intercom. Messerschmitt B F-1009 Säulen, Germany's premier fighter, fast, agile, deadly, armed with cannons and machine guns, flown by experienced pilots who had been fighting since the war began. They made head-on passes first, diving through the bomber formation from the front, attacking the nose gunners, testing the defenses, looking for weak spots. Jim watched from the tail. He couldn't engage them yet. They weren't in his arc of fire. He could only wait. Then they came for him. 2 Bf-109s positioning themselves behind the formation. 6 o'clock position. The classic tail attack. This was what Jim trained for. This was what Burke had taught him. Hold fire until 300 yards. Jim watched them approach, his hands on the guns, his finger near the trigger, his breathing steady despite his racing heart. The fighters grew larger, 500 yards, 450, 400. Burke's voice in his head. Wait, conserve ammunition. 300 yards, not before. 350 yards. The lead Messerschmitt's nose lit up with cannon fire. Yellow flashes, 20-millimeter shells streaking toward Lucky Strike. Jim squeezed the triggers. Too late. The cannon shells hit first, punched through the tail section, shattered the plexiglass bubble. Fragments flew everywhere. Jim felt them whip past his head, felt the aircraft lurch. He fired back, the .50 calibers hammering, tracers reaching out. But the Messerschmitt was already past climbing away, rolling to come around for another pass. Jim checked himself. No hits. Lucky. He looked around. The tail section was damaged. Holes everywhere. Hydraulic fluid leaking. One of his ammunition belts torn apart by a shell fragment. But he was alive. "Tail gunner, you okay back there?" Hayes called. "Yes, sir. Took some hits, but I'm fine." "Can you still fight?" "Yes, sir." The fighters made 2 more passes. Jim fired each time, following doctrine, waiting until 300 yards. He scored some hits, saw his tracers strike one of the Messerschmitts, but neither fighter went down. The attack broke off. The German pilots had used their ammunition. They turned back toward France. Lucky Strike continued toward the target. Jim sat in his damaged position shaking, not from fear, from realization. He had done everything right, followed doctrine, waited until 300 yards. But the enemy had fired first and nearly killed him. If those cannon shells had been 6 inches to the left, he would be dead. Following the doctrine had almost gotten him killed. But worse was coming, much worse, because flying 40 feet away off Lucky Strike's right wing was another B-17, another crew, another tail gunner. His name was Bobby Martinez, 22 years old, from Arizona. Jim had met him during training. They became friends, ate breakfast together, wrote letters home together, talked about what they would do after the war. Bobby was flying his 6th mission, Jim's first. And on that 6th mission, Bobby Martinez would do exactly what the doctrine said. He would follow orders. He would wait until 300 yards, and he would die. The day doctrine failed, June 15th, 1943. Mission number 6 for Jim Mitchell. Bremen, Germany. Submarine yards and port facilities. High priority target. Heavy defenses expected. Bobby Martinez sat in the tail of B-17 Hells Angels flying formation 40 feet from Lucky Strike. Close enough that Jim could see Bobby's aircraft clearly, could see the tail position where his friend waited with his guns. They had eaten breakfast together that morning. Powdered eggs and bacon, strong coffee that tasted like motor oil. Bobby had shown Jim a photograph. His girlfriend, Maria, dark hair, bright smile, standing in front of a house in Tucson. "After 25 missions, I'm going home," Bobby said. "Gonna marry her, gonna have kids, gonna live a normal life." Jim had nodded. "I'll be your best man." "Damn right you will." That was 5 hours ago, before the bombers took off, before they crossed the channel, before the fighters came. Now they were deep over Germany. The target was ahead. Flak bursting around them, black clouds of shrapnel that could tear an aircraft apart. But the fighters were the real threat. Always the fighters. They appeared at 11:30. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, dozens of them, coming from all directions. The formations hit from the front first, head-on passes, testing the bomber defenses, looking for damaged aircraft stragglers, weak points in the formation. Then they repositioned, swung around behind the bomber stream. Set up for tail attacks, Jim watched them come. 6 fighters, working in pairs, professional, coordinated. These were not rookies. These were experienced pilots who knew exactly what they were doing. 2 of them selected Hells Angels as their target, Bobby's aircraft. Jim saw it happening, saw the fighters positioning themselves. 6 o'clock position, 1,200 yards back, diving slightly to build speed, coming in fast. He keyed his intercom. "Bob, you seeing the fighters on Hells Angels?" "I see them," Hayes replied. "Nothing we can do. Bobby knows his job." Jim watched. The fighters closed. 1,000 yards, 900, 800, Bobby's guns remained silent. Following doctrine, waiting for 300 yards, doing exactly what Captain Burke had taught them. 700 yards, Jim's hands tightened on his own guns. He wanted to shoot, wanted to fire at those Messerschmitts even though they were outside his arc of fire. Wanted to do something, anything to help his friend. But he was helpless. Could only watch. 600 yards. The lead Messerschmitt's wings sparkled with cannon fire. 20-millimeter shells. High explosive. Designed to destroy bombers. The German pilot knew his business. Knew how to aim. Knew how to lead a moving target. 500 yards. The shells walked up Hell's Angels' fuselage. Bright flashes as they impacted. Metal tearing. Plexiglass shattering. 400 yards. Bobby's guns still had not fired. Still waiting for 300 yards. Still following the doctrine. 350 yards. The second burst hit the tail section directly. Jim saw it happen. Saw the plexiglass bubble explode. Saw fragments flying. Saw smoke. Bobby's guns never fired. Not once. He had waited for 300 yards just like the manual said. Just like Burke taught him. But the enemy had not waited. Hell's Angels lurched out of formation. The tail section was wrecked. Black smoke poured from the fuselage. The bomber began to fall, losing altitude, dropping away from the protective formation. Jim watched, numb, frozen. "Shoots," someone yelled over the radio. "I see shoots from Hell's Angels." Parachutes blossomed in the sky, white canopies against the blue. Jim counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 parachutes from a crew of 10. Bobby Martinez was not among them. The tail gunner never got out. He died in his position, doing his job, following orders, following the doctrine that was supposed to keep him alive. Hell's Angels fell for 20,000 feet before it exploded, a bright orange fireball that turned into black smoke. Debris scattered across the German countryside. Jim watched until there was nothing left to see. Then he turned back to his guns. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from anger. The doctrine had killed Bobby. The 300-yard rule, the wait and conserve ammunition philosophy, all of it. Bobby had followed every rule perfectly, and he was dead. Lucky Strike continued to the target, dropped its pions, turned for home. Jim sat in his tail position, staring at empty sky, replaying what he had seen over and over. The fighters had opened fire at 600 yards. Bobby waited until 350. The difference was 250 yards. 2 seconds of time. That was all. 2 seconds. The difference between life and death. The flight back to England took 3 hours. Jim did not speak on the intercom, did not respond when crew members asked if he was okay. He was okay physically, but something had broken inside him. Some faith in the system, some trust in authority. They landed at Kimbolton at 1600 hours. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft, checking for damage, refueling, rearming. Jim climbed out of the tail position. His legs were stiff from sitting for 7 hours. His face was marked with pressure lines from his oxygen mask. Hayes found him standing beside the aircraft. "Mitchell, you all right?" "Yes, sir." "Bobby was a good man. Good friend of yours, I heard." "Yes, sir." Hayes put a hand on Jim's shoulder. "I know this is hard. First time losing someone close. Won't be the last. But you can't let it break you. We have more missions to fly. Your crew needs you sharp. Understand?" "I understand, sir." But Jim did not understand. Did not understand why Bobby had to die. Did not understand why following the rules had gotten him killed. Did not understand how he was supposed to keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. That night, Jim could not sleep. He lay in his bunk in the barracks staring at the ceiling. Other crew members snored around him, exhausted, drained by the mission, able to sleep despite everything. Jim could not. His mind kept running calculations, kept analyzing what he had seen. Bobby waited for 300 yards. The enemy fired at 600. Bobby died. The equation was simple. But the doctrine said, wait. Burke said, wait. The manual said, wait. The entire United States Army Air Force said, wait. Who was Jim Mitchell to say they were all wrong? Just a 24-year-old from Montana. A kid who had been in combat for exactly 1 week. What did he know that experienced officers did not? But then Jim thought about his father. Thought about hunting elk in the Montana mountains. Thought about the lesson Thomas had taught him. Shoot where the target will be, not where it is. Make noise early, make the animal change direction. Control the situation. Smart action beats patient inaction. What if the same principle applied here? What if shooting early, even at low probability ranges, disrupted the enemy's attack, made them break off, made them change direction? What if the doctrine was based on bad assumptions? Assumptions that the enemy would cooperate, would fly straight, would give you time. But the enemy did not cooperate. They shot first. They shot early. They killed you while you were waiting for the perfect shot. Jim pulled out the family photograph from his footlocker, looked at it in the dim light, his mother and father. David smiling, young, eager. David would be shipping out soon, finished with basic training, heading to Europe, infantry, the most dangerous job in the Army after tail gunner. Jim needed to survive, needed to help end this war, needed to get home, needed to make sure David had a home to come back to. Following the doctrine would not get him there. Bobby had proved that. Jim made a decision. Next mission, he would try something different. Would shoot early, would test his theory, would either prove he was right or die trying. Either way, he would not die Bobby's way, would not die waiting for permission. He wrote a letter to his mother, did not send it, just wrote it and put it in his footlocker with the photograph. Dear Ma, today I watched my best friend die because he followed orders. Tomorrow I'm going to try something different. If you're reading this letter, it means I was wrong. Tell David to be smarter than his brother. Tell him I love him. Love, Jim. He folded the letter, put it away, lay back down. Tomorrow was mission number 7, Saint Nazaire, French coast, submarine pens. Another high-priority target. Another day of fighters and flak and death. Tomorrow, Jim Mitchell would become a rebel. The mathematics of survival. June 16th through 24th. 8 days between missions. 8 days for Jim to think, to calculate, to plan. He spent hours in this tail position during maintenance periods. Sat on the bicycle seat with his guns working through the mathematics. A Messerschmitt B F-109 approaching from 6 o'clock at 400 miles per hour. Bomber flying at 180 miles per hour in the opposite direction. Combined closure rate 580 miles per hour. That was 960 feet per second. 16 feet per second difference from 600 miles per hour, but close enough. At 800 yards, the fighter was 2,400 feet away. At 960 feet per second, that meant 2.5 seconds to cover the distance. But the fighter was not trying to reach the bomber. The fighter was trying to establish a firing position, a stable platform where the pilot could aim and fire accurately. At 800 yards, a diving fighter presented a clear target, flying almost straight at the tail position. Wings and fuselage fully visible, easy to track. Easy to hit if you could accept the ammunition cost. The key was the tracers. Every 5th round was a tracer. Burned bright, left a visible trail. The pilot could see them coming. If Jim fired at 800 yards, the pilot would see tracers streaking toward his aircraft. Human instinct would take over. The pilot would flinch, would maneuver, would break off his attack run before reaching effective cannon range. Even if Jim missed, the psychological effect would work. The pilot would be forced to react, would lose his careful aim, would waste his attack. The cost was ammunition. At 800 yards, Jim would need longer bursts, maybe 100 rounds per engagement instead of 50. That meant 8 engagements instead of 16. But 8 successful defenses were better than 16 opportunities to die. The doctrine assumed you would survive to use all your ammunition. Jim's approach assumed you needed to survive first, worry about ammunition second. Dead men did not need reserve bullets. Jim practiced dry firing, tracking imaginary targets, adjusting his aim, building muscle memory for the longer ranges. Other tail gunners noticed. Mike O'Connor from Devil's Own walked over one afternoon. "Mitchell, what are you doing?" "Practicing." "Practicing what you're tracking targets at, like 800 yards. "Yeah," O'Connor laughed. "That's crazy. You'll never hit anything at that range. You'll just waste ammo." Jim did not argue, let O'Connor think what he wanted, but he kept practicing. June 24th, Mission 7, Saint Nazaire, French coast. The briefing came at 0400 hours. Jim listened to the intelligence officer describe the target, the expected opposition, the survival statistics. 10% losses expected today. 20 aircraft. 200 men. After the briefing, Jim walked to Lucky Strike. The crew was quiet, everyone thinking about the mission, about the odds, about whether they would see England again. Jim performed his pre-flight ritual, loaded ammunition, 800 rounds per gun, checked the feed mechanisms, tested the guns, everything perfect. He pulled out the family photograph, looked at it, kissed it, put it back in his flight suit pocket. For Bobby, he whispered. For David. For everyone. Then he climbed into the tail position and waited for takeoff. Breaking the rules. The mission proceeded normally until they crossed the French coast. Flak batteries opened fire. Black puffs of smoke filled the sky. Shrapnel rattled against Lucky Strike's fuselage like hail on a tin roof. But flak was random, impersonal. You could not fight it, could only fly through it and hope. Fighters were different. Fighters you could fight. They appeared at 11:30 hours. Focke-Wulf 190s this time. Heavily armed, dangerous. Coming in groups of 4. Head-on passes first. The bomber formation's defensive fire drove them off. No losses. Not yet. Then the fighters repositioned, swung around behind the formation. Jim watched them come. His heart was pounding. His mouth was dry. This was it. This was the moment. 2 FW-19s selected Lucky Strike, positioned themselves at 6 o'clock, began their attack run. Jim's hands gripped the gun handles. His thumbs rested on the triggers. He took a deep breath. Burke's voice in his head. Wait for 300 yards. Conserve ammunition. Follow the doctrine. Bobby's face in his mind. Dead in the tail of Hell's Angels. Following the doctrine perfectly. Jim's father's voice. Shoot where the target will be. Smart action beats patient inaction. 800 yards. Jim squeezed both triggers. The twin .50 calibers roared. The tail position filled with the sound and smell of gunfire. Shell casings ejected, bouncing off the plexiglass. The guns hammered against their mounts. Tracer rounds streaked across the sky. Bright lines of fire, too low at first. Jim adjusted. The tracers climbed, 750 yards. The lead Focke-Wulf pilot saw the tracers coming, saw streams of fire reaching toward his aircraft. Human instinct kicked in. He flinched. 700 yards. The tracers connected. Bright flashes sparked along the fighter's engine, cowling. Hits. Solid hits. 650 yards. The German pilot broke hard right, pulled out of his gear. Black smoke trailed from his engine. He was not destroyed, not killed, but his attack was disrupted. Ruin. He never got close enough to fire his cannons. 600 yards. The second fighter followed his leader. Broke off, dove away. Neither aircraft fired a shot at Lucky Strike. Jim held the triggers down for 2 more seconds, then released. The guns fell silent. Smoke drifted through the tail compartment. His ears rang from the noise. Hayes' voice crackled over the intercom. Mitchell, what the hell are you doing? Those fighters were still 600 yards out. Jim keyed his mic. They're not anymore, sir. You just wasted 150 rounds. But they didn't shoot at us, Rare. We took no damage. Silence on the intercom, then Greenberg's voice excited. Holy shit! Did that just work? Can it, Greenberg? Hayes snapped. Mitchell, we'll discuss this after we land. Right now, stay alert. More fighters coming. 3 more attacks came during the mission. Jim fired early every time. 800 yards. 750. Long bursts. Walking the tracers onto target. Forcing the pilots to react. Disrupting their attacks. 2 fighters broke off without firing. 1 pressed through, took hits, limped away smoking. None of them got clean shots at Lucky Strike. The bomber returned to Kim Bolton with minimal damage. A few flak holes. 1 hydraulic line nicked. Nothing serious. But the crew chief was not happy. He checked the ammunition expenditure. 500 rounds gone. More than half Jim's combat load. 3 times the normal amount. Mitchell, what the hell were you doing back there? Having a private war. Just shooting at Germans, Chief. At this rate, you'll run out of ammo before you hit Germany. Jim shrugged. Rather run out of bullets alive than save them dead. The crew chief shook his head, walked away muttering. Captain Burke summoned Jim to his office 2 hours later. Burke sat behind his desk, expression hard, arms crossed. Airman Mitchell, I've reviewed your ammunition expenditure. 500 rounds on a single mission. Care to explain? I engaged targets at extended range, sir. You violated doctrine. You wasted ammunition on low-probability shots. Yes, sir, but Lucky Strike came home with no battle damage, no casualties. We completed the mission successfully. Burke leaned forward. This time, what about next time? What about when you're 500 miles into Germany and you run dry because you couldn't control your trigger finger? What happens when fighters attack and you have nothing left to shoot back with? Jim met Burke's eyes. Sir, with respect, I watched Bobby Martinez follow doctrine perfectly. He waited for 300 yards. He conserved his ammunition, and he died. The enemy doesn't wait. They shoot early. They shoot often. If we keep doing what we're doing, we'll keep dying. Martinez was unlucky. Hit in the first burst. Could happen to anyone. It happened because he waited, sir. If he'd shot earlier, disrupted the attack, he might still be alive. Burke stood, walked to the window, looked out at the flight line where bombers sat waiting for tomorrow's mission. Mitchell, you're a good gunner. Best reflexes I've seen. But you're also arrogant. You think you know better than men with years of experience. Men who wrote the doctrine based on thousands of missions. I think the doctrine is based on bad assumptions, sir. Burke turned. This is your only warning. Follow established procedure. Conserve your ammunition. Engage at 300 yards. If you continue to violate doctrine, I will have you removed from flight status. Understand? Yes, sir. Dismissed. Jim left the office, walked across the base. Other crew members were relaxing, playing cards, writing letters, trying to forget about the war for a few hours. But Jim could not forget, could not relax. He had broken the rules, and it had worked. Lucky Strike came home untouched. His crew was safe, and he was going to keep doing it. Keep breaking the rules, keep shooting early, even if it got him court-martialed, even if it got him killed. Because dying his way was better than dying Bobby's way. The hunter becomes hunted. Jim did not know it, but his actions that day had been noted, not just by Captain Burke, not just by the crew of Lucky Strike, but by someone else, someone across the English Channel, someone who was very interested in American bomber tactics. Northern France, JG-26 fighter base, headquarters of one of the Luftwaffe's elite fighter units. Hauptmann Klaus Weber sat in the intelligence office reading after action reports from the day's missions. 31 years old, Knight's Cross around his neck, 47 confirmed kills, most of them bombers. Weber was not a fanatic, not a Nazi ideologue, just a professional pilot doing his job. He had been fighting since Poland, had seen the war change, had watched the Luftwaffe go from dominance to desperation. The American bombing campaign was taking its toll, German cities burning, factories destroyed. The Luftwaffe was running out of aircraft, running out of fuel, running out of time. But they were not running out of pilots yet. Men like Weber, experienced, skilled, determined to defend their homeland. Weber read the reports carefully. Several pilots reported unusual American defensive fire. Tail gunners engaging at ranges exceeding 600 meters. Attacks disrupted before firing solutions could be established. Most pilots dismissed it as panic fire. Americans wasting ammunition, getting scared. But Weber saw something else. Saw a pattern. Saw coordination. Saw tactics. He called in his intelligence officer. Oberleutnant Friedrich, young, smart, good at analysis. Friedrich, look at these reports. What do you see? Friedrich studied the papers, frowned. Extended range fire from American tail gunners. Unusual. Not standard for them. Exactly. The Americans usually wait until 300 meters. Very disciplined. Very predictable. But now some of them are shooting early. Why panic number? Look at the pattern. Multiple aircraft, multiple missions. This is not panic. This is tactics. Someone is teaching them to shoot early. Or someone figured it out on their own. Weber nodded. Possible. Either way, it's dangerous. If this tactic spreads, our approach patterns will not work anymore. We will take more losses. He pulled out a map, marked the locations where unusual fire had been reported, circled one area. This group, 379th Bombardment Group, RAF Kim Bolton. They show the pattern most clearly, multiple reports. One aircraft in particular, B-17 identified as Lucky Strike. Tail gunner very aggressive, multiple engagements at extended range. Do we have any details on this crew? No, but I want them. Next time they fly deep into Germany, I want to see this tail gunner myself. I want to understand what he's doing, how he's thinking. Friedrich nodded. I'll alert the forward controllers. When the 379th flies, you'll know. Weber stood, walked to the window. Outside Focke-Wulf 190s sat on the flight line, his aircraft among them. Black crosses on the fuselage, yellow nose, the markings of an ace. This American tail gunner, Weber said quietly. He's thinking, he's adapting. That makes him dangerous. We need to stop him before others learn from him, before the tactic spreads. You want to target this specific aircraft? Yes, next deep penetration mission. I'll be waiting. Weber did not know the tail gunner's name, did not know he was 24 years old from Montana, did not know about Bobby Martinez or the broken doctrine or the rebellion brewing in Jim Mitchell's heart. But he knew one thing. This American was different. This American was a threat. And Hauptmann Klaus Weber made his reputation by eliminating threats. Across the channel, Jim Mitchell slept fitfully in his bunk, dreaming of fighters and tracers and Bobby falling through the WWII, not knowing that one of Germany's best pilots was now specifically hunting him. The hunter had become the hunted, and the real test was still to come. The word spreads late June through mid-July 1943. Jim Mitchell flew 5 more missions. Bremen, Hanover, Hamburg, each time he fired early. Each time Lucky Strike came home with minimal damage. Mission 8, June 29. Hanover. 3 fighter attacks. Jim engaged at 750 yards each time. Expended 400 rounds. 2 fighters broke off. 1 pressed through, took hits, limped away, trailing smoke. Lucky Strike, no casualties, minor flak damage. Mission 9, July 2nd. Hamburg. 5 attacks. Jim fired at 800 yards. 600 rounds gone. 4 fighters disrupted. 1 destroyed. Jim watched it spiral into the North Sea, trailing fire. His first confirmed kill. Lucky Strike scratched paint from near miss, nothing more. Mission 10, July 8th. Wilhelmshaven, return mission. Heavier opposition this time. 8 separate attacks over 2 hours. Jim burned through 700 rounds. His gun barrels glowed red from sustained fire. The tail compartment filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. 3 fighters broke off. 2 pressed through, but their aim was disrupted. They missed. Lucky Strike survived. After each mission, the crew chief complained about ammunition expenditure. After each mission, Captain Burke called Jim into his office. After each mission, Burke threatened to ground him. But Burke never followed through, because Lucky Strike kept coming home. Mission after mission, while other bombers in the group took damage, while other crews died. The statistics were impossible to ignore. By mid-July, other tail gunners were asking questions. Mike O'Connor from Devil's Own approached Jim in the mess hall. Mitchell, can I ask you something? Sure. O'Connor sat down, lowered his voice. This thing you're doing, shooting early, does it really work? I'm alive, my crew's alive. What do you think? Burke says you're wasting ammo. Says you'll run dry over Germany one day and get everyone killed. Jim took a bite of powdered eggs, chewed, swallowed. Burke also said Bobby Martinez should wait for 300 yards. How'd that work out? O'Connor flinched. Everyone knew about Bobby. Everyone knew he had followed doctrine perfectly. Everyone knew he died anyway. So what's the secret? O'Connor asked. How do you know when to shoot? There's no secret. You see a fighter at 800 yards, you shoot. Tracers make him flinch. He flinches, he can't aim. He can't aim, he can't hit you. Simple. What about ammunition? Dead men don't need reserve ammo. O'Connor nodded slowly. Yeah, that makes sense. You mind if I try it? Your guns, your life, do what you want. 2 days later, O'Connor tried it. Mission to Villa Kublai. He engaged fighters at 700 yards. Devil's Own came home untouched. O'Connor survived. Word spread, quietly at first. Tail gunners talking in barracks at night, sharing experiences, comparing results. By late July, 4 tail gunners in the 527th Squadron were using variations of Jim's technique. Their survival rate was better. The bombers they protected returned with less damage. Captain Burke noticed, called a meeting of all tail gunners. Gentlemen, it has come to my attention that some of you are engaging targets at extended ranges, violating established doctrine. I want to be clear, this is unauthorized, dangerous, and will stop immediately. Silence in the room. 30 tail gunners, all of them thinking the same thing, thinking about Bobby Martinez, thinking about the crews that did not come back, thinking about survival. One of them spoke up, Sergeant Paul Henderson, older than most, 29, a veteran of 12 missions. Sir, with respect, the extended range fire is working. Aircraft using this tactic are taking less damage. Crews are surviving. Burke's face reddened. Sergeant, the doctrine exists for a reason. Ammunition conservation is critical. Long-range fire is ineffective. You're wasting rounds on low-probability shots. But, sir, the fighters are breaking off. They're not completing their attacks. This time, what about next time? What about when you run out of ammunition over the target and have nothing left for the flight home? Henderson glanced at Jim, then back at Burke. Sir, I'd rather face that problem than die waiting for 300 yards. Burke slammed his hand on the desk. This discussion is over. You will follow established doctrine. That is an order. Dismissed. The tail gunners filed out. Burke stopped Jim at the door. Mitchell, this is your doing. You started this. I'm just trying to survive, sir. You're undermining discipline, encouraging others to disobey orders. I'm not encouraging anything. I'm just doing my job my way. Burke stepped close, voice low. You're going to get men killed. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when it happens, it'll be on your head. Jim met his eyes. Men are already getting killed, sir, following your doctrine. Bobby Martinez, Bill Thompson, Henry Chen, all dead. All follow the rules perfectly. So yeah, I'll take my chances my way. He walked out before Burke could respond. Castle, July 30th, 1943. Mission number 13 for Jim Mitchell. The briefing came at 0300 hours. Still dark outside. The crew stumbled into the briefing room, half asleep, clutching coffee, trying to wake up. The intelligence officer pulled back the curtain, covering the wall map. A red line stretched from England across the North Sea, across Germany, deep into the interior. The longest penetration the 8th Air Force had attempted all month. Gentlemen, today's target is Kassel, ball-bearing factories, critical to the German war machine. This will be a maximum effort. 186 aircraft, expected opposition heavy. Intelligence estimates 300-plus fighters positioned along your route. The room went silent. 300 fighters. That was more than they had ever faced. More than seemed possible. The P-47 Thunderbolts will escort you as far as Belgium. After that, you're on your own. 500 miles into Germany. 500 miles back. Expect continuous fighter attacks. Expect heavy casualties. The intelligence officer paused, let that sink in, then continued. Current loss projections, 12 to 15%. That's 20 to 28 aircraft. 200 to 280 men. Someone in the back whispered, Jesus Christ. Jim sat quietly, doing math in his head. 15% loss rate. 1 in 7 aircraft would not come home. Lucky Strike had flown 12 missions. Statistically, they were due. But statistics did not account for tactics, did not account for shooting early, did not account for survival instinct overriding doctrine. After the briefing, Jim walked to Lucky Strike with his crew. The pre-dawn darkness was giving way to gray light. Fog hung low over the airfield. The bombers were shadows in the mist. Hayes gathered the crew. Listen up. This is the big one. Deepest we've been. Most opposition will face. I need everyone sharp, everyone focused. We take care of each other. We all come home. Understood. Yes, sir, they replied in unison. Hayes looked at Jim. Mitchell, I know Burke's been on your case about ammunition. Forget him. You do what you need to do back there. Keep us safe. Yes, sir. Jim performed his ritual, loaded ammunition, This time he loaded extra, 1,000 rounds per gun instead of 800. The belts were heavier, the feed mechanism strained, but Jim wanted every bullet he could carry. He pulled out the family photograph. His parents, David, all of them smiling. David was 19 now, finished basic training, shipping to Europe soon. Jim kissed the photograph, whispered, "For you, little brother, for all of you." Then he climbed into the tail position and prepared for the longest mission of his life. The flight to Germany took 3 hours. The formation crossed the channel at 14,000 feet, climbed to 25,000 over occupied Europe. The temperature dropped to 60 below zero. Ice formed on the plexiglass. Jim's electrically heated suit barely kept hypothermia at bay. The P-47 escorts held formation around the bomber stream. Their presence was comforting, but temporary. At the Belgian border, they waggled their wings and turned back. Fuel exhausted. The bombers continued alone, into the heart of Germany, into the killing zone. The fighters found them at 11:42, small dots on the horizon, growing larger, multiplying. 8 became 12. 12 became 20. 20 became 40. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, issuing from airfields across Germany, assembling into gaggles, positioning for coordinated attacks. Jim counted them until he lost track. More fighters than he had ever seen, more than he thought existed. "Bandits, 12 o'clock level. WWII," someone called over the radio. The first attacks came from head-on. German pilots diving through the formation from the front, testing the defenses, looking for weak spots. Then they swung around, positioned behind the formation, prepared for the tail attacks. Jim's moment had come. A staffel of 12 B-F-109s began their approach. 6 o'clock position, 1,200 yards back. Professional, coordinated. These were veterans. They knew what they were doing. Jim tracked the lead aircraft in his gun sight, waited. Not for 300 yards, but for the right moment. The moment when he could do maximum damage. 800 yards. Jim squeezed both triggers. The 50 calibers hammered. Tracer rounds streaked across the sky. Too low at first, Jim adjusted. The tracers climbed toward the diving fighters. 700 yards. The lead Messerschmitt flew into Jim's stream of fire. Rounds connected. Sparks flashed along the engine cowling. Pieces flew off the aircraft, 650 yards. The German pilot broke hard right. Smoke poured from his engine, black and thick. The fighter rolled dove, disappeared into the clouds below. Kill number 2, the rest of the staffel scattered. Some pressed their attacks against other bombers, but 3 broke off completely, unwilling to face the tail gunner who shot early. "Good shooting, Mitchell," Hayes called over the intercom. Jim did not respond, already tracking the next threat. 2 Focke-Wulfs, approaching low, trying to come up under his guns. He depressed the barrels to their mechanical limit. Fired, long burst, 100 rounds. The lead FW-190 pulled up early, climbed away, did not press the attack. The second one was either braver or more foolish. He continued, his cannons lit up, yellow flashes. 20-millimeter shells streaking toward Lucky Strike. Jim held his triggers down, walked the tracers onto the target. Connection. The Focke-Wulf staggered in midair. Something broke. The aircraft snap-rolled, inverted, dove. Jim watched it fall, did not see it crash, but it was going down. Kill number 3, maybe, probably. He marked it as a probable. No time to confirm. Because more were coming, the attacks continued for 47 minutes. Wave after wave. The sky filled with fighters. The radio filled with voices. Bombers calling out threats. Gunners reporting kills. Pilots announcing damage. Lucky Strikes shook from near misses. Flak bursts. The concussion from exploding aircraft nearby. But she held together. Jim fired at everything within range. Burned through ammunition at a rate that would have horrified Captain Burke. His gun barrels glowed red. The tail compartment filled with smoke. Shell casings piled around his feet. His arms ached from holding the gun steady. 800 rounds gone. 700 remaining. At 12:29, a BF-109 made a mistake. Approached from dead astern, straight and level, Either extraordinary courage or poor judgment. Jim would never know which. He centered the Messerschmitt in his gun sight, held both triggers down. 6 continuous seconds, over 100 rounds poured into the approaching aircraft. The results were catastrophic. The engine separated from the fuselage. Wings folded backward. The fighter came apart in midair, tumbled past Lucky Strike, close enough for Jim to see inside the cockpit. Empty. The pilot had ejected, or died. Jim did not know, did not care. 500 rounds remaining. The formation reached Castle at 12:51. Began the bombing run. For 11 minutes, the bombers had to fly straight and level. No evasive maneuvers. The bombardiers needed stability to aim. The Luftwaffe knew this, knew the bombers were most vulnerable during the bomb run. They pressed their attacks with renewed fury. A Focke-Wulf 190 dove on Lucky Strike from the 5 o'clock position, high and to the right. Jim swung his guns to meet it, fired a short burst. 50 rounds, hits on the wing root. The pilot kept coming, his cannons fired. 20-millimeter shells tore through Lucky Strike's tail section. Jim felt the impacts before he felt the pain. Metal tearing, plexiglass shattering. Then the burning sensation. Left arm, left shoulder. Something hot and sharp embedded in his flesh. His left gun jammed. Feed mechanism shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the compartment, mixed with blood. His blood. But Jim kept firing. Right gun only, one-handed. Tracked the Focke-Wulf as it pulled away. Final burst. Caught the tail assembly. The fighter snap rolled. Dove toward the ground, trailing fire. Kill number 4. Confirmed. But the cost was high. Jim looked down at his left arm. Blood everywhere. His flight suit was torn. Fragments of 20-millimeter shell embedded in his shoulder, his arm, his side. He counted 11 separate wounds, none fatal, but all painful. Blood pooled on the floor. Began to freeze in the 60 below zero air. Turned to red ice. The intercom crackled. "Tail gunner, you okay back there?" Jim tried to respond. His throat was too dry. He swallowed. Tried again. "Left gun's out. I'm hit. Still fighting." "How bad?" "I'll make it." "Can you continue?" Jim looked at his ammunition counter. 180 rounds remaining. Looked at his one functioning gun. Looked at the blood. "Yeah, I can continue." "Good man. Bombs away. We're heading home." The formation turned west, left Castle burning beneath a column of black smoke. Began the long flight back to England, 250 miles, through the same gauntlet of fighters, with one gun, with 180 rounds. Jim wrapped a scarf around his wounded arm, tried to stop the bleeding. The scarf turned red immediately. The cold helped, numbed the pain, slowed the blood flow. He wiped his face. Blood smeared across his oxygen mask, across the gun sight, across the plexiglass. But he could still see, could still fight. And the fighters were not done with him yet. The long way home. The return flight began at 13:04. Lucky Strike turned westward with 185 other bombers. Castle fell away behind them. Mission accomplished. Bombs on target, factory destroyed. But survival was not guaranteed. Not until wheels touched English soil. The Luftwaffe regrouped over Belgium. Fresh aircraft replaced those lost or damaged in the morning attacks. They positioned themselves along the bomber stream's route to the Channel. The second gauntlet would be as dangerous as the first. Jim remained at his position, scanning the sky through blood-smeared plexiglass. His left arm had gone numb. Whether from cold or nerve damage, he did not know. His jammed gun hung useless in its mount. One working weapon, 180 rounds. That was all. The mathematics were brutal. 180 rounds, maybe 9 engagements at 20 rounds each, maybe 6 at 30 rounds, maybe 3 at 60. Every trigger pull had to count. At 13:31, 2 Bf-109s closed from the 7 o'clock position, slightly behind and to the left. Standard tail attack variant. Jim waited, conserving ammunition now. Not by choice, by necessity. He let them approach to 500 yards, closer than he had fired all day. Then he squeezed the trigger. Right gun only. 12-round burst. Short, precise. The lead Messerschmitt took hits along the engine cowling. Not fatal, but enough. Books streamed. Coolant leaked. The pilot broke off. rolled away. His wingman followed. 168 rounds remaining. Lucky Strike crossed into France at 14:15. The fighter attacks diminished. The Luftwaffe reached the limit of their operational range. Fuel exhausted. Ammunition expended. They turned back toward their bases. The bomber formation outran the last German interceptors by 14:47. The English Channel appeared on the horizon 20 minutes later. Jim allowed himself to relax, slightly. The immediate danger had passed, but he was still bleeding, still in pain, still a long way from safety. Hayes's voice came over the intercom. All crew check in, report status. One by one the crew reported. Minor wounds, equipment damage, but everyone alive. Tail gunner. Still here, sir, wounded but functional. How bad? Bad enough, I'll need help getting out. Roger, medical will be waiting. The landing at Kimbolton came at 15:52. Lucky Strike touched down hard. The damaged tail made steering difficult, but Hayes brought her in, taxied to the hard stand, shut down the engines. Ground crew swarmed the aircraft, saw the damage, saw the blood, called for medics. 2 men climbed into the tail compartment, found Jim still sitting on the bicycle seat, still holding his gun, blood frozen on the floor, blood on the walls, blood everywhere. Jesus Christ, one of them whispered. They pulled him out carefully, through the narrow tunnel, out into daylight. Jim's legs did not work properly. They carried him to a waiting ambulance. The flight surgeon was there. Captain Howard. Good doctor. Experienced with combat wounds. Let's see what we've got, Sergeant. He cut away Jim's flight suit, examined the wounds. 11 separate fragment wounds. Left arm, left shoulder, upper back, ribs on the left side. You're lucky, Mitchell. Missed all the major blood vessels. Missed the nerves, nothing vital hit. You'll be sore for a while, but you'll heal. How long? 3 weeks minimum, maybe a month. Depends on how you recover. Jim nodded, closed his eyes, exhausted, drained. The adrenaline was wearing off, the pain was growing. You did good today, Sergeant, Howard said quietly. I heard you got 4 confirmed kills while wounded, operating 1 gun. That's remarkable. 4 confirmed, sir. Maybe a 5th if intelligence can verify the one that went down smoking. Even better, rest now, we'll get you fixed up. They loaded Jim into the ambulance. As it pulled away, he looked back at Lucky Strike. The tail section was a wreck. Bullet holes everywhere, shattered plexiglass, hydraulic fluid and oil leaking onto the tarmac. But she had brought them home. All 10 crew members. Jim had done his job, had protected his crew, had survived. The doctrine said it was impossible. Captain Burke said he would run out of ammunition and die. But Jim had proved them wrong. The question was, would anyone listen? The ripple effect. Word spread through the 379th Bombardment Group within hours. The tail gunner on Lucky Strike had scored 4 confirmed kills while wounded, operating a single gun, had defended his aircraft through the deepest penetration of the month, and he had done it all using unauthorized tactics, shooting early, burning through ammunition at 3 times the normal rate. Other tail gunners heard, other crews heard. The story grew with each retelling. By evening, it had become legend. Mike O'Connor visited Jim in the station hospital. Brought news. Mitchell, you're famous. Everyone's talking about Castle. 4 kills, wounded, 1 gun. It's incredible. Jim lay in bed, arm bandaged, shoulder immobilized, doped up on morphine for the pain. Not incredible, just necessary. Burke's pissed, says you violated orders, says you should be court-martialed. Yeah, well, Burke can go to hell. O'Connor laughed. That's the spirit. Listen, 3 more tail gunners tried your method today. On missions after Castle, all 3 came back fine. Minimal damage. The technique is spreading, Jim. You started something. Started what, a mutiny? No, a revolution. You proved the doctrine is wrong. You proved shooting early works. Now others are following your example. Jim closed his eyes, thought about Bobby Martinez, about the doctrine that killed him, about the men who might live because Jim had been willing to break the rules. Good, he said quietly. Maybe fewer men will die Bobby's way. O'Connor left. Jim drifted in and out of sleep. The morphine made everything hazy. Dreams mixed with memories, fighters and tracers, blood and smoke, his father's voice. Bobby's face. 3 days later, a letter arrived. From Montana, from his mother. Jim opened it with his good hand, read slowly. Dear James, your father and I are so proud. We heard about your medals, about your courage. The whole town is talking about you. You're a hero, son. But more than that, you're proving what I always knew. You're smart, you're brave, and you're willing to do what's right even when it's hard. Your father says what you're doing, challenging the old ways when you knew they were wrong. That's what made America great. He's proud of you. I'm proud of you. But James, I need to tell you something. David finished training. He's shipping to Europe next month, infantry. James, I'm terrified. I know you can't stop this war alone. But every day you fly, every mission you complete, you're helping end this faster. Please keep fighting. Please keep surviving. David needs you. We all need you. Come home safe, both of you. Love, Ma. Jim read the letter 3 times, then held it against his chest, closed his eyes. David was coming, his little brother, shipping to Europe, to the infantry, the most dangerous job in the Army after bomber crew. The stakes had just gotten personal in a whole new way. Jim was not just fighting for survival anymore, not just fighting to prove a point. He was fighting to end the war, to end it before David had to fight. Every mission that succeeded was one day closer to victory, one day less that David might spend in a foxhole dodging German bullets. The technique was not just about saving his own life anymore. It was about saving everyone's life, including his brother's. Jim folded the letter carefully, put it with the family and photograph, his 2 most precious possessions. Then he lay back and began to plan. 3 weeks until he could fly again. 3 weeks to heal. 3 weeks to prepare. Because somewhere across the channel, Hauptmann Klaus Weber was preparing too, studying reports, planning his own mission. And when Jim Mitchell returned to the sky, Weber would be waiting. August, the calm before storm. August 19th, 1943. Captain Howard examined Jim's wounds one final time. The fragment scars had healed. The shoulder mobility had returned. The pain had faded to a dull ache. You're cleared for flight status, Sergeant. But take it easy. If anything feels wrong, you tell your pilot immediately. Yes, sir. Jim returned to Lucky Strike. The bomber had been repaired. New plexiglass in the tail, new hydraulic lines, fresh paint covering the patched bullet holes. But she was the same aircraft, same crew, same mission. Hayes greeted him on the hard stand. Welcome back, Mitchell. We missed you back there. Good to be back, sir. Temporary tail gunner did okay, but he wasn't you. Ready to fly. Jim looked at the tail position, his position, the loneliest job in the war, the place where he had nearly died, the place where he had proved everyone wrong. Yes, sir. I'm ready. Over the next 2 weeks, Jim flew 3 more missions. Each one he fired early. Each one Lucky Strike came home. His kill count climbed. 5 confirmed. 6. 7. Other tail gunners across the 379th had adopted his technique. Ammunition expenditure was up, but casualties were down. The correlation was undeniable. Captain Burke stopped calling Jim into his office. The statistics had spoken louder than doctrine, but Jim knew something was coming, could feel it. The Luftwaffe was changing tactics. Fighters were diving faster, attacking from steeper angles. They were adapting. And somewhere in France, Klaus Weber was watching, waiting. September 5th, the briefing. September 5th, 1943. Evening briefing. Unusual timing. Usually briefings came at 0:30, but this mission required more preparation. The intelligence officer stood before the assembled crews. His face was grim. Gentlemen, tomorrow's target is Stuttgart. Deep penetration, 500+ miles into southern Germany. Ball-bearing factories. Strategic priority Alpha. He pulled back the curtain. The red line on the map stretched farther than any previous mission. Farther than Kassel. Farther than anything they had attempted. Expected opposition maximum. Every fighter group in southern Germany will be airborne. Intelligence estimates 150 to 200 interceptors. Maybe more. The room was silent. 200 fighters. You'll fly in lead position of the combat wing. 379th will navigate for the entire formation. That means first in, last out, maximum exposure. Hayes raised his hand. What about fighter escort? P-47's will take you to the Belgian border. After that, you're alone. Estimated time without escort 4 hours. 2 hours and 2 hours out. 4 hours alone against 200 German fighters. Current loss projections 15 to 20%. That meant 30 to 40 aircraft would not return, 300 to 400 men, dead, wounded, or captured. Or someone in the back muttered, "This is suicide." The intelligence officer heard it. "This is war, Lieutenant, and those ball-bearing factories supply the entire German war machine. We destroy them, we cripple their production, we shorten the war. You save lives, maybe American lives, maybe the lives of your brothers and friends in the infantry." Jim thought of David, somewhere in England now, training, preparing to land on a hostile beach, to fight through hedgerows and forests, to face German machine guns and artillery. Every mission that succeeded was one day closer to ending David's war before it started. After the briefing, Jim walked to Lucky Strike alone. The evening was cool, stars appearing in the darkening sky. Peaceful, deceptive. He climbed into the tail position, sat on the bicycle seat, looked out through the plexiglass at the empty sky. Tomorrow, Klaus Weber would be in that sky. Jim knew it, could feel it. The German ace had been hunting him for months. Tomorrow they would finally meet. Only one of them would walk away. Jim pulled out the family photograph, looked at it in the fading light. His parents, David, all of them depending on him, all of them waiting for him to come home. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "whatever happens tomorrow, I did my best. For Bobby, for you, David, for everyone." He kissed the photograph, put it back in his pocket. Then he loaded his guns. Not 800 rounds per gun, not even 1,000. This time he loaded 1,200 rounds per gun, 2,400 total. Every bullet the feed mechanisms could handle. If Weber was coming, Jim would be ready. September 6th into hell, 0540 hours. Takeoff. 187 B-17's climbed into a gray morning sky. Lucky Strike in the lead element. First bomber in the formation. Most exposed position, most dangerous. But also the position of honor. The position for the best crews. The ones who came home. Jim settled into his tail position. Performed his ritual. Checked guns. Checked ammunition. Touched the family photograph. "This is the big one," Hayes said over the intercom. "Everyone stay sharp. We've been through hell before. We'll get through it again. Together." The formation assembled over the North Sea, turned southeast, crossed the Channel, entered occupied Europe at 14,000 feet. The P-47 escorts held position. Their presence was comforting but temporary. Jim watched them carefully. These would be the last friendly fighters he would see for 4 hours. At the Belgian border, the Thunderbolts waggled their wings, turned back, disappeared toward England. The bombers continued alone. Jim scanned the empty sky, waiting, knowing what was coming. They appeared at 0915, small dots on the horizon, growing, multiplying. Not 20 fighters, not 40, more than Jim had ever seen, more than seemed possible. "Bandits 12 o'clock high," which as someone yelled. "Jesus Christ, there must be 100 of them." The first attacks came from head-on, wave after wave, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs diving through the formation. The sky filled with tracer fire, cannon shells, bombers shaking from near misses. Then the fighters repositioned, swung around behind the formation. Jim's heart pounded. His mouth was dry. This was it. Among the mass of German fighters, one Focke-Wulf 190 flew differently, more controlled, more precise. Black crosses on the fuselage, yellow nose, the markings of an ace. Klaus Weber had found Lucky Strike, and he was coming. The duel. 10:08 hours. The rear attacks began. 20 fighters, maybe more, positioning themselves behind the formation. But Weber's FW-190 was in front, leading. Jim tracked him through the gun sight, 800 yards, 750, 700. Jim squeezed both triggers. Tracers reached out, too low. Jim adjusted. The stream climbed toward the diving Focke-Wulf, 650 yards. Weber saw the fire, but unlike other pilots, he did not flinch, did not break off. He adjusted his dive slightly, rolled to the side, came in at a different angle. This pilot was different. This pilot was good. 600 yards. Weber's cannons lit up. 20-millimeter shells streaked toward Lucky Strike. Jim felt them impact, felt the bomber shudder. Jim held his triggers down, walking fire onto the target. Connection. Sparks flashed on Weber's engine cowling. 500 yards. Weber kept coming. Jim kept firing. This was not a normal engagement. This was two professionals. Two men who understood their craft, fighting for their lives. 450 yards. Weber's Focke-Wulf trailed smoke. Not heavy, not fatal, but damaged. He had taken hits, but so had Lucky Strike. 400 yards. Weber pulled up, climbed away, did not press the attack. Too risky. Jim's fire was too accurate, but he would be back. Tail section damage. What? Someone yelled over the intercom. Hydraulics failing, losing pressure. Hayes fought the controls. She's getting sluggish. Mitchell, can you still fight? Jim looked at his guns. Still functional? Looked at his ammunition. 1,000 rounds remaining. Yes, sir, I'm still in the fight. The attacks continued, but Jim watched for Weber, waited for him. At 10:31, Weber made his move. He dove from directly above and behind, using the sun to mask his approach. Classic veteran tactic. Jim spotted him too late, half a second too late. Weber's cannons fired first. Multiple hits. The tails section exploded in fragments. Jim's left gun shattered. Feed mechanism destroyed. Hydraulic fluid sprayed everywhere, mixed with blood. His blood. Fragments tore through his flight suit. Left arm, shoulder, side. The same places as Castle. Fresh wounds on old scars. But Jim kept fighting. Right gun only, one-handed. He swung the gun toward Weber's climbing Focke-Wulf. Fired. Long burst. Desperate. Determined. Connection. Rounds walked up Weber's fuselage. Hit the engine. Black smoke poured out. Thick. Heavy. For 3 seconds as the Focke-Wulf pulled up and over, Jim Mitchell and Klaus Weber could see each other through their respective canopies. Two young men, both far from home, both fighting for survival, both professionals who respected their craft. Weber's eyes, surprise, pain, respect. Jim's eyes, defiance, determination, refusal to quit. Then the moment passed. Weber's FW-190 rolled over, trailing heavy smoke, damaged badly, maybe fatally. Jim could not tell, but Weber was out of the fight, limping toward France, trying to make it home. Just like Jim, the ditching over target, 11:04, Lucky Strike released its bombs. Mission accomplished. Factory destroyed. But the bomber was dying. Both hydraulic systems failed. Tail controls barely responsive. Number 2 engine running rough. Number 4 losing oil pressure. Fuel leaking from punctured tanks. Hayes assessed the damage, ran calculations, made the decision every bomber pilot dreaded. Gentlemen, he said calmly, we can't make England. Fuel situation is critical. Controls are failing. Best option is a controlled ditching in the English Channel. Air-sea rescue will be waiting. Silence on the intercom. Then one by one the crew acknowledged. Navigator acknowledged. Bombardier acknowledged. Tail gunner acknowledged. Jim remained at his position during the descent. Scanning for fighters. One gun, maybe 800 rounds remaining. Wounded again, bleeding again. But no fighters came. The Luftwaffe had other targets, healthier bombers, easier kills. Lucky Strike crossed into France at 14:15. Crossed the coast at 15:08. The English Channel spread out beneath them. Gray water, cold, deadly. Hayes aimed for a clear stretch. No waves, no whitecaps. Best chance for survival. All crew braced for impact. This is going to be rough. Jim wedged himself against the gun mount, wrapped both arms around it. The family photograph pressed against his chest. Please, he whispered. Please let me see them again. 12 hours, impact, 120 miles per hour, into cold English water. The fuselage shattered on impact. Aluminum crumpled like paper. The tail section separated. Broke away. Jim was thrown forward. His head hit the gun mount, hard. Darkness. When consciousness returned, Jim was floating. Cold water soaking through his flight suit. Someone had pulled him out, dragged him to a life raft. British rescue boats were approaching. Fast, efficient. They had done this before. Jim looked around, counted heads. 1, 2, 3. All 10 crew members, all alive, floating, rescued. Lucky Strike was gone. 17 missions. She had carried them through everything. And now she rested at the bottom of the English Channel. But her crew lived. Hayes pulled himself into the raft beside Jim, looked at him, smiled weakly. You saved us, Mitchell. Every mission, every time. You kept us safe. Jim shook his head. Water dripped from his face. Blood mixed with seawater. No, sir. We saved each other. That's what crews do. The British boats arrived, pulled them from the water, wrapped them in blankets, gave them hot tea, started the journey home. As the boat headed toward England, Jim pulled out the family photograph. Soaked, damaged, but still intact. He could still see their faces. Still here, he whispered. Still fighting. And somewhere across the channel, Klaus Weber's Focke-Wulf landed at a French airfield. Damaged, smoking, but intact. Weber climbed out, looked at his destroyed engine, at the bullet holes. That American tail gunner, that man from the B-17 called Lucky Strike. Weber would never forget him, would never forget those eyes, that determination. The war would end someday, and maybe, just maybe, they would meet again. Not as enemies, but as survivors, as men who understood what it meant to fight and live. October, the reckoning. October 14th, 1943. Jim stood in his dress uniform at RAF Kimbolton, arm in a sling, shoulder still healing, but standing straight, standing proud. Brigadier General Frederick Anderson, commander of 8th Bomber Command, stood before the assembled 379th Bombardment Group. In his hand, a small blue box. Staff Sergeant James Mitchell, for extraordinary heroism in action against enemy forces. Despite severe wounds on multiple occasions, you continued to defend your aircraft with exceptional skill and determination. Your innovative defensive tactics have been studied, validated, and adopted throughout this command. Your actions have directly contributed to increased bomber survival rates and mission success. It is my honor to present you with the Distinguished Service Cross. General Anderson pinned the medal to Jim's chest. Second highest award the United States Army could give, just below the Medal of Honor. The assembled men applauded. Hayes, Chen, Greenberg, Russo, the entire Lucky Strike crew, Mike O'Connor, every tail gunner in the group. They understood what this meant. Jim Mitchell had challenged the system, had been right, and now the system acknowledged it. After the ceremony, Anderson pulled Jim aside. Sergeant, I've read the analysis. 14 bomber groups, 3 months of data. Tail gunners using extended range engagement show 23% higher survival rates. Bombers they protect show 31% less battle damage. Your technique works. Thank you, sir. The implications are significant. We're issuing new gunnery guidelines effective November 1st. Tail gunners will be authorized to engage targets at extended ranges when tactical conditions permit. We're rewriting the doctrine, Sergeant, because of you. Jim felt something he had not felt in months. Vindication, but also sadness. Sir Bobby Martinez followed the old doctrine. He's dead. How many others died following rules that were wrong? Anderson's expression hardened. Too many, Sergeant. That's why we're changing. That's why your actions matter. You proved the old way was failing. You found a better way, and you had the courage to keep doing it even when everyone told you to stop. He paused, looked Jim in the eye. Do you know how many men you have saved, not just your crew, all the crews, all the tail gunners who learned from you? Conservative estimates put it at 3,000 to 5,000 American lives saved or spared serious injury because you refused to follow bad orders. 3,000 to 5,000 lives, the number was staggering, impossible to comprehend. I was just trying to survive, sir. You were thinking, Sergeant. That's what made the difference. You questioned, you analyzed, you adapted. That's what wins wars. Not blind obedience, smart action. Anderson shook Jim's hand. You're grounded for medical reasons. Head trauma from the ditching. But you've done your part. More than your part. Go home, Sergeant. You've earned it. October 20th, the letter Jim sat in the base hospital writing. The doctor said he could not fly anymore. Recurring headaches, vision problems, delayed concussion effects. His combat career was over at 24 years old. 20 missions, 17 confirmed kills, 4 probable, 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 Air Medals, Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster for 2 wounds, more decorations than most pilots earned in a full tour. But Jim felt incomplete. The war continued. His work was not done. He wrote to his mother, "Dear Ma, the doctors say I can't fly anymore. Part of me is relieved. Part of me feels guilty. So many men still fighting, but they're sending me stateside. Training duty. I'll teach new tail gunners what I learned. Maybe save more lives that way." David is in England now. I saw him yesterday. He looks good, strong, ready. He knows about the technique, says his unit heard about it, says it's helping end the war faster. I hope he's right. I hope I'm home before he has to fight. I hope this war ends soon. Love, Jim. He sealed the letter, mailed it, then lay back in his hospital bed and closed his eyes. His war was over, but the impact of his war was just beginning. November through 1945. The RIPPLE, the new gunnery guidelines, went into effect November 1st, 1943. Across every bomber group in the 8th Air Force, tail gunners learned the technique. Engage early, disrupt the attack, accept the ammunition cost. Survive first, worry about bullets second. The results accumulated through the winter of 43, through the spring and summer of 44, through the final campaigns of 45. Bomber loss rates declined, not just from the new doctrine. Longer range fighter escorts helped. P-51 Mustangs that could fly all the way to Berlin and back. Improved aircraft systems, better tactics overall. But defensive gunnery played its role, and Jim Mitchell's technique was part of that improvement. German fighter pilots noticed. Interrogation reports from captured Luftwaffe aircrew mentioned the change. The increased danger of tail attacks. The difficulty of achieving clean firing solutions. The American gunners who shot early and forced evasive action. One report from a captured pilot of JG-26 mentioned a specific encounter. The American tail gunners have changed tactics. They engage at 600 meters or more. Very aggressive, very dangerous. I encountered one in July 1943. Focke-Wulf damaged badly. Lucky to survive. This tactic is spreading. Tail attacks are no longer advantageous. Jim never saw that report, but he would have recognized the date, July 30th, Kassel, the mission where everything had come together. January 1944 training. Jim returned to the United States in January 1944, assigned to the gunnery school at Las Vegas, the same school where Captain Burke had taught him. Burke was gone, transferred to another command, but the doctrine remained. The 300-yard rule, the conservative approach. Jim's first day as an instructor, he stood before a class of 30 young men, all training to be tail gunners, all volunteers, all knowing the statistics. "Gentlemen," Jim said, "my name is Staff Sergeant Mitchell. I flew 20 combat missions over Europe, 17 confirmed kills. I'm here to teach you how to survive." He walked to the blackboard, drew a B-17, drew a fighter approaching from 6 o'clock. The old doctrine says wait until 300 yards. Hold fire. Conserve ammunition. I'm here to tell you that doctrine will get you killed. He marked ranges on the board. 800 yards, 700, 600. You will engage early. You will fire at extended ranges. You will disrupt the enemy's attack before he can establish a firing solution. Yes, you will use more ammunition, but dead men don't need reserve ammo. The students listened, some skeptical, some confused. This contradicted everything they had heard. "I know this sounds wrong," Jim continued. "I know the manual says something different, but I watched my best friend die following that manual, and I've seen this technique save hundreds of men, so you're going to learn it my way, the way that works, the way that brings you home." He taught for 18 months, trained over 3,000 tail gunners. Every one of them carried his technique into combat. Some flew in Europe, some in the Pacific, some in both theaters, and they survived, at higher rates than previous classes. The statistics bore it out. Jim Mitchell's students came home after 1945. David. The letter came in April, from Europe, from David. "Dear Jim, We're in Germany now. The war's almost over. I made it through. A few close calls, but I'm okay. Met some Air Corps guys last week. They told me about a tail gunner from Montana who changed how they fight. Took me a minute to realize they were talking about my brother. You saved lives, Jim. Maybe even mine by helping end this faster. The guys I talked to said the bombing campaign crippled German production. Made our job on the ground easier. Fewer tanks, fewer planes, fewer bullets coming at us. So thank you. Thank you for doing what you did. See you soon. David. Jim read the letter alone in his quarters at the training base, read it 3 times, then folded it carefully, put it with the family photograph, his most precious possessions. David was alive, was coming home. The war in Europe was ending. Jim had fought for many reasons. To survive, to prove a point, to save his crew, but always underneath everything he had fought for David. To end the war before David had to fight. And it had worked. David was coming home. May 8th, 1945, victory. The war in Europe ended on May 8th, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. The killing stopped. The bombers stopped flying. The fighters stopped attacking. And somewhere in occupied Germany, Klaus Weber stood among the ruins of his country. His war was over. He had survived. Against all odds. Against hundreds of combat missions. He had lived. He thought about the American tail gunner, the one who had damaged his aircraft over Stuttgart, the one whose eyes he had seen for those 3 seconds, the one who had fought with such determination. Weber wondered if that man had survived, wondered if they would ever meet, wondered what they would say to each other if they did. The war was over. They had been enemies, but now they were just survivors, 2 men who had done their duty, who had fought with honor, who had lived. Maybe someday, Weber thought, maybe someday I will find him, shake his hand, tell him that I respect what he did, that I understand why he did it. But that day was years away. First came occupation, reconstruction, a new world order, the Cold War, the division of Germany. Weber became a translator for the American occupation forces, used his English skills to help bridge the gap between conqueror and conquered. And occasionally in the mess halls and air bases he heard stories. Stories about the 8th Air Force. Stories about tail gunners. Stories about a technique that had changed everything. And always he wondered, was that him? Was that the man I fought 1947? The letter in March 1947, Klaus Weber sat in his small apartment in the American zone. A translator's salary did not provide luxury, but it provided survival. That was enough. He had been reading through old American military publications, aviation magazines, historical accounts, trying to understand how the air war had been won and lost. One article caught his attention, The Tail Gunner Who Changed Doctrine. It described the evolution of defensive tactics in the 8th Air Force, how one man had challenged the established rules, how his technique had spread, how thousands of lives had been saved. The article mentioned the 379th Bombardment Group, RAF Kim Bolton, a B-17 called Lucky Strike, a tail gunner named James Mitchell, from Montana. Weber sat back, stared at the name, James Mitchell, the man from those 3 seconds, the eyes he had seen through gun sights, the determination, the skill. He had a name now, a location, Montana, United States. Weber pulled out paper, began to write in careful English. Sergeant Mitchell, I do not know if this letter will reach you. I do not know if you remember September 6, 1943. But I do. I was flying the Focke-Wulf that engaged your aircraft. You wounded my plane. I wounded you. We both survived. I have read about your technique, about how you changed American bomber defense. As your enemy, I must admit, it was effective. You forced us to adapt. You made our attacks more difficult. You saved many American lives. As a fellow pilot, I respect your courage to challenge doctrine. That is rare in any Air Force, any military. I do not ask for forgiveness. War is war, but I wanted you to know this. The man you fought that day over Stuttgart holds no hatred, only respect for a worthy opponent. I am glad we both survived. I hope you have found peace. Klaus Weber, former Hauptmann, Luftwaffe JG-26. He mailed the letter through American military channels. addressed to Staff Sergeant James Mitchell, United States Air Force, Montana. Weeks passed, then months. No response came. Weber did not know if the letter had been delivered, did not know if Mitchell had received it, did not know if Mitchell cared, but he had said what needed saying, had extended the hand of respect across the divide of war. That was enough. 1947, Jim's response. Jim received the letter in June. At his home in Red Lodge, Montana, he had transferred to the newly formed United States Air Force in 1947, remained in service, continued training gunners, but lived at home when not on duty. He read Weber's letter 3 times, carefully, thoughtfully. Then he sat down to write a response. Wrote it, crossed it out, wrote again, crossed it out again. Finally, he wrote simply, Captain Weber, I remember September 6th. I remember those 3 seconds. I remember your eyes. You were good, very good. I was lucky. We both were. The war is over. We fought with honor on both sides. You did your duty. I did mine. I don't hate you. Never did. You were just a man doing his job like me. Maybe someday we can meet, shake hands, talk about what we learned, but not as enemies, as survivors, as men who understand. Until then, know this, I respect you too, James Mitchell. He sealed the letter, then decided not to mail it. Not yet, maybe not ever. Some things were better left unsaid. Some connections were better left unformed. The war was over. They had both survived. They had both done their duty. That was enough. He put the letter in a drawer, with the family photograph, with David's letter, with his decorations, the artifacts of a war that was ending, the memories of a time he could not forget. 1947 through 1962 service, Jim Mitchell did not leave the military after the war. While other veterans rushed home, rushed to forget, rushed to build normal lives, Jim stayed. He transferred to the United States Air Force, continued training gunners even as bombers evolved, as jet aircraft replaced propeller planes, as guided missiles replaced guns. In 1948, he married Sarah, a nurse he had met at the base hospital. In 1950, their son Thomas was born. In 1952, their daughter Ellen. Jim's family asked why he stayed in the military, why he did not come home, build a civilian life, leave the war behind. He struggled to explain. How could he tell them that the Air Force was his home, that the mission was not complete, that as long as young men flew into danger, he needed to teach them how to survive? I can't leave, he told Sarah one night. Not yet, not while I can still help. She understood, or at least she accepted. Military wives learned acceptance, learned patience, learned to support their husbands through choices they might not make themselves. The years passed. Jim rose to Master Sergeant, the highest enlisted rank. He trained thousands more gunners, developed new defensive tactics as technology evolved, wrote training manuals, lectured at military schools, and always he carried the family photograph. Worn now, faded, but still recognizable. His parents. David, himself as a young man, before the war, before Bobby, before everything. In 1962, at age 43, Jim retired. 20 years of service. 2 tours, one as a combat airman, one as an instructor. He returned to Red Lodge, to Montana, to the mountains and forests where he had learned to hunt, where his father had taught him to shoot where the target would be. Thomas Mitchell had died in 1955. Heart attack, sudden, unexpected. Jim had not been there, had been at a training base in Puz, teaching, always teaching. Ellen still lived in the family house. Older now, gray hair, but the same gentle smile, the same kind eyes. Welcome home, James, she said when he arrived, using his full name, the way she did when things mattered. It's good to be home, Ma. Your father would be proud, what you did, what you became. Jim nodded, could not speak. The emotions were too much, too long suppressed, too deeply buried. He settled into civilian life, or tried to, but the war never left him, never really ended. The dreams continued. Bobby falling, fighters diving, the sound of guns, the smell of blood and smoke. But he had Sarah. He had his children. He had survived. That was more than many men could say. 1985 memoir. Elmer Greenberg. Lucky Strike's navigator published his memoir in 1985, Fortresses of Faith, A Navigator's War. The book became a surprise bestseller. Military history buffs loved it. Veterans recognized the authenticity. Families of men who had served found validation in its pages. One chapter was titled, The Tail Gunner Who Changed Everything. It told Jim's story, Bobby's death, the rebellion, the technique, the vindication. Greenberg sent Jim a copy, inscribed it to Jim Mitchell, the bravest man I ever flew with. You saved us all, every mission, every time. Thank you. Elmer. Jim read the book in one sitting, remembered everything, the missions, the fear, the cold, the fighters, the choices that defined his life. Sarah found him crying in his study, the book open on his lap, the family photograph in his hand. Are you okay? She asked. I'm remembering, Jim said quietly, remembering who we were, what we did, why it mattered. Does it still matter? Yes, it always will. February 15, 1990, the end. Jim Mitchell died on February 15, 1990. Heart failure, age 70, at home in St. Augustine, Florida, where he and Sarah had retired. He died peacefully, surrounded by family, Sarah holding his hand, Thomas and Ellen beside the bed, grandchildren waiting in the next room. His final words were unclear, a whisper, but Sarah thought she heard Bobby and David and home. Then he was gone. February 20, 1990, the funeral, National Memorial Cemetery of Arizona. Full military honors, flag-draped casket, honor guard from Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, 21-gun salute, taps played by a single bugler. The ceremony was simple, dignified, military. David Mitchell gave the eulogy, 71 years old now, retired Army colonel, gray hair, straight back, strong voice. My brother taught me three things, David said. First, rules exist for good reasons. But when the reasons change, you must have the courage to change the rules. Jim looked at the doctrine that was killing his friends. He questioned it, tested it, proved it wrong, and changed it. That took courage. Moral courage, the kind that's rarer than physical bravery. He paused, looked at the casket, at the flag, at the medals displayed on a pillow beside it. Second, sometimes the right thing looks like rebellion until everyone else catches up. Jim was called reckless, arrogant, dangerous, until his technique worked, until it spread, until it saved thousands. Then he was called innovative, courageous, revolutionary. But he was the same man the whole time, doing what he believed was right, even when everyone told him he was wrong. David's voice cracked slightly, emotions breaking through military bearing. Third, legacy isn't about medals or glory. It's about the people who go home to their families because you had the guts to do what was right instead of what was easy. Jim saved thousands of lives, not by following orders, by thinking, by adapting, by having the courage to be different when different was what worked. He looked at the assembled mourners, veterans in their 70s and 80s, wearing old uniforms that no longer fit quite right, wearing ribbons earned half a century ago, men who remembered. Jim saved my life, not directly, but by helping end the war faster, by making the bombing campaign more effective, by crippling German production. He saved me and thousands like me, and I never got to thank him properly. David's voice steadied, grew stronger. So I'll thank him now, Jim Mitchell, my big brother. Thank you for teaching me to question. Thank you for showing me courage. Thank you for coming home. Rest easy, brother. Mission complete. The bugler played taps. The honor guard fired 3 volleys, 7 rifles, 3 times, 21 shots. The salute to a warrior. They folded the flag, 13 folds, each with meaning, each with symbolism, presented it to Sarah. On behalf of the President of the United States and a grateful nation. Sarah accepted it, held it against her chest. The last gift from the Air Force to the man who had given 20 years of his life. The headstone was simple, white marble, standard military issue. James Mitchell, Master Sergeant, United States Air Force, World War II, 1918 to 1990. No mention of 17 kills. No mention of 2 Distinguished Service Crosses. No mention of changing doctrine. No mention of thousands saved. Just a name, a rank, a service, a war. But the people who mattered knew. The veterans, the historians, the families of men who had come home because Jim Mitchell refused to follow bad orders. They knew. Present day, the meaning. The mighty 8th Air Force Museum in Savannah, Georgia preserves the history. The 379th Bombardment Group's records are archived there. Mission reports, after action summaries, statistical analyses, and in those archives, researchers can trace the evolution of doctrine, can see the moment when everything changed, can read the reports that mention Jim Mitchell's name, can understand how one man 24 years old from a town of 800 in Montana changed the way America fought a war. The B-17 tail gunner position no longer exists. The aircraft are gone, reduced to museum pieces, carefully preserved, lovingly restored, but no longer flying, no longer fighting. But the principles endure. The lessons remain. Question authority when authority is wrong. Think for yourself when the system fails. Have the courage to be different. When different is what works, accept the cost of being right when everyone says you are wrong. And remember, always remember, dead men do not need reserve ammunition. Survival comes first. Victory comes from survival. Legacy comes from victory. Jim Mitchell understood that, lived it, taught it, and saved thousands because he had the courage to break the rules when the rules were wrong. That is his legacy, not the medals, not the kills, the lives saved, the men who came home, the families reunited, the children born, the futures lived, because one man from Montana refused to accept that good men had to die following bad rules. If you served, or if your father or grandfather served in the 8th Air Force over Europe, you understand what this means. You understand what these men faced, what they gave, what they sacrificed. And if someone in your family came home from that war, there's a chance, however small, that Jim Mitchell's technique helped bring them back. So remember his name, tell his story, honor his courage. James Mitchell, tail gunner, rebel, revolutionary, the man who proved the system wrong, the man who saved thousands, the man who changed the way America fought, and the man who understood better than most that smart action beats patient inaction. That courage means doing what's right even when everyone says you're wrong. That legacy is measured in lives saved, not glory won. God bless Jim Mitchell. God bless the greatest generation. And God bless America.